And it struck me that the relationship Jesus wants is proximity, exactly what you were saying at the start, that proximity to us. But sometimes we create it to be a task, and Jesus just wants to dance with us. He just wants to have the closeness. And so as I've come back to that, it's almost become a bit of a meditation for me.
Welcome to the Prophecy Project, an accessible prophecy podcast. In each episode, we explore some aspect of prophecy, from theology and practical aspects of hearing God, through to leading healthy prophetic cultures and exploring how prophecy can enhance local mission. Accessible Prophecy is a global ministry that helps individuals grow in the prophetic and helps local churches grow healthy and mature prophetic cultures. And now, here are your hosts, Andrew Hill and Christine Wanstall.
Welcome to the Prophecy Project, an accessible prophecy podcast. Andrew Hill, welcome to season 3. How's that?
Is it season 3 already?
I know. We didn't actually do that many recordings for season 2, and it's been a bit of a gap since we recorded the last one. So I figure we could just say that we're in season 3.
I think that's a great idea. I think that's a really, really good idea. Because actually, I think we did a gathering here in Australia, like a national gathering here in Australia, and then I think we did like a post-gathering podcast, but it didn't sort of get there because you were busy,
No,
I was busy, and
I know. And it was
great.
it was a great gathering, wasn't it? It was such a good time together.
It was brilliant.
And I hear a rumor. Andrew, as a Christian, you know, rumors just sit around. I hear a rumor there may be a gathering coming up in Australia next year. And so if you're listening, keep your eyes open for some potential news that will come out.
Excellent. And
how exciting is that?
Just by way of mentioning the word gathering, you've actually just come back from is it worldwide gathering of AP leaders? A
global gathering of AP leaders. Ooh. I have, Andrew. I know. How exciting.
Start. Was it good?
Yeah. It was amazing, actually. We had 3 days together in Sheffield in the UK. So that's Kath's hometown. And it's sort of the central point for the Europe guys. So there was people from Denmark, from Canada, from the US. We've got Jelena from Serbia. And guys from the UK were there. So we were very well represented across the world, and I'm sure that I've missed some country out. Netherlands. Ron, if you're listening, I'm so sorry.
Sorry, Ron. We do remember you were there.
Yeah, we do. Ron and Rose. It was really fascinating.
So while all the countries of the world gathered for the Olympics in Paris, you gathered for a worldwide global gathering of all the AP leaders in England. We did. London? Wow.
In Sheffield. In Sheffield, up the north of the country.
Nice.
So I just hope my camera hadn't just turned off on the recording, but anyway, I pressed something I shouldn't have pressed. It was a little blank. I just disappeared there for a minute. If you're watching on YouTube, sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, it was really interesting to gather together as a global AP family, leaders from around the world, to discern and really dig in. What does God have for AP in this next season? What's God's vision for AP? What does He want to do with the ministry? Because this is God's work. How does He want to use it? But there was some fascinating content. I'll give a little teaser around. Kath gave us some amazing content around the nature of rebellion and how, you know, we can have rebellious hearts, and just how tricky that can be for a prophet point of view, given our wiring is to disrupt. So how can we submit to God? how can we
Yeah.
lay down everything that God gives us with this sort of tension that we are wired to see transformation, which by its very nature can be disruptive.
Wow.
So it was some really, really fascinating content that I'm hoping Kath will develop more, and we'll be able to send out to everyone to because it's really thought provoking. As a
Mm.
Christian, we know that we need to submit to God,
Yeah.
and we know that we need to be led by God.
Yeah.
But how does our wiring fit in around that as prophets? What's the nature of what the prophetic brings?
Mm.
And yeah, so it was deeply challenging, I have to say, Andrew. But there were some great plans that came out of it, and a real sense of God being present. The other thing that I would say, I've talked a lot in this first 5 minutes. The other thing I would say is that we
You've got a
spent
lot
a
to
bit of
say. That's okay. It's
oh,
okay.
I've got a lot
Go
to
for
say.
it. You do.
Um, in the other thing that we did, we weren't just looking at AP globally. We were actually looking at how are we growing deeper in our prophetic gift with God as well. So
Mm.
there was a real challenge there around as prophets. If people with the prophetic wiring, we should be seeking to go deeper with God all of the time. We should be seeking
Yeah.
to grow in our gifting, to have a deeper walk. And it was fascinating just spending time listening, spending time reflecting, and having the privilege. I think life's so busy, sometimes it's a real privilege to carve out that time to really spend with
Mm.
God,
Yeah.
to hear from Him about what that looks like for us individually. So there you
Yeah.
go.
That's really good. It's interesting though that you that you were talking about that whole rebellion side, because I think we've been doing this journey just in our context here at New Community, so the church that I'm part of, through Exodus recently, and it's really interesting that when the people of Israel, you get to somewhere around, I don't know where, I think I'm not sure if it's exactly here, but, it's around that chapter 32 part where, they create the golden calf, they say, Aaron talks to Moses, and I'm doing this off the cuff. So it's like Aaron talks to Moses and says, oh, look, yes, we got them to take off all their jewelry and their gold, and we placed them in the fire, and out came a calf. Like, it's so stupid. But this whole idea of the rebellion of the people when Moses came down from the mountain, and you realize that this whole idea of Moses, who was God's representative at that point, being absent from the people, being distant from the people, meant God was distant from the people. And because he was away, they just went their own way. And it gets me, that whole idea of rebellion, it does get me thinking about the power of proximity. When you're in close connection with God, when you are hearing from God, when you are walking in close step with God, there's almost like this dynamic that happens. You feel like, oh, it's good, it's going well, things are happening. But what happens when God seems absent? What happens when we feel like he's quiet? What happens when, we're not necessarily speaking to God? Is there a temptation just to go our own way and develop what we want to develop, what we think we should be doing or could be doing? Because then I think it goes on in, Exodus 32, and it talks about all the things that then the Israelites put in place. They had this image, then they were going to do this feast and that feast, and, make this agreement and all these sorts of things, which is exactly what God had asked them to do, but they did it in their own, in their own way, in their own form, and totally rebelled against what God was doing. And I think it all boiled down to that whole idea of proximity. So is there something in that for us, in what you're talking about? Is there something in that for us that actually proximity matters. How we're pursuing God, how we're trying to draw close to Him, trying to draw people back to Him. And part of that is the role of the prophet, isn't it?
It is, and it's the prophet is there to I term it, take people by the hand and help them encounter God's heart. Like,
Yeah.
it's what is God saying to people, and it's out of God's heart, His love, His care, um, His words of wisdom. But I think the whole thing around proximity is around relationship. It's
Okay.
the recently I found myself saying in a church setting, sometimes we treat God like Google. And I might have said it previously on the podcast, because we just continually to go to God for what should I do here? What should I do there? But actually God is a God who wants relationship, who wants to spend time with us. And
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Andrew, but when we were chatting about season 3, about the podcast for this season, I remember the conversation a number of weeks ago. There was some real heart cries from both of us about the real challenge in pastoral ministry, particularly when we're constantly hearing stories of pastors falling, of
Yeah.
misconduct, of affairs, of just it just devastates the church when
Yeah.
these things happen. And from a prophetic point of view, I just sit there going, God's heart bleeds in these situations. Like,
Yeah.
it's frustrating, it's disappointing, it's upsetting to hear, but it's not that we're upset with the person, because there are so many complicated factors and layers that
Mm.
happen around misconduct. I'm not downplaying, like,
No.
clergy abuse, and there's all sorts of issues around power dynamics and role responsibilities, all of those things.
Yeah.
But it saddens me that how do we stop that happening? How do we help people develop deeper spiritual lives, deeper lives and relationship with God
Yeah.
as a preventative? Maybe I'm trying to feel like that should be a preventative factor for us,
Yeah.
to develop that deep relationship with God, so that we're not in situations where churches are devastated when the pastoral leaders leave
Yeah.
because of misconduct.
Absolutely. And some of it is that whole idea. Well, what I talked about with the people of Israel in Exodus, that whole idea of, we go our own way. And so even, the celebrity pastor phenomenon, really, were we supposed to be all these celebrity pastors? Like, I think, and, and where things get beneath us, oh, I don't do that anymore because, that's beneath me. I don't do that, or I don't do that. I just sit up here, it's like, what is that? Aren't we here to, I don't know. I think my philosophy of ministry, it becomes very different. And so, that whole idea of actually being with people, serving the people rather than lording it over the people, and, all those sorts of things. And I'm not saying that celebrity pastors do that, but I do wonder whether in some situations things get the better of people. And so it does move them away, proximity, maybe even from what God called them to do, and maybe they lose sight of that.
So this is an unscripted question. People who listen to the podcast, we do have a vague outline as we head into these conversations, but invariably we go rogue.
That's who we
Andrew,
are.
that's like, you've been in significant pastoral positions, and I'm not going to ask you to go through those,
Yep.
but I guess my question is, can you help us understand some of the dynamics that sit around that sort of senior leadership in a church? What are some of the pressures that pastoral leaders face?
Look, there are all sorts of. I think there are lots of pressures that lots of different pastors face in lots of different sizes of churches. So it's not just the biggest of the big, and I've been part of some of the biggest in Victoria, in Melbourne here in Australia. And I have to say, there are some, please hear me, there are some really amazing leaders within larger churches that I have had the privilege of serving with, and they are amazing, amazing people who are there to serve God and his people. So let me say that. But look, there's always pressure, there's expectation of, how things go, how things look, how things sound, when you talk about weekends, and there's an expectation that you're hearing from God, and that that you're able to speak that clearly to people, and so your messages have got to be right on. There's all this pressure and expectation, and even sometimes very unrealistic expectations. And so there are different church cultures that unfortunately, they do set people up to fail, because there's no way you could live up to that. And so, you've obviously got, multi-staff churches, so you're required to understand budgets, and you've got to be in tune with the Spirit while understanding the budget and trying to help people in their discipleship walk with giving. But, is that something that, that weighs people down? I think it does. And, then you've got realistic pay structures and, all those sorts of things. So there are lots of pressures. And some churches are set up like, corporations. So, the senior pastor is the CEO, and, the business manager is the CFO, and, then you've got a COO, like a chief operating officer, like in business. And that's it's very different to what we're trained for in Bible college. Don't train you to do that. And most pastors don't have business backgrounds. And so how do you manage all of those expectations at once? It does take its toll. And so when you focus on the things that maybe the pastor's not necessarily meant to focus on, because and maybe that's because we're not resourced well enough with the right people around us. And as I said, I have been very blessed to be able to be in places where there are really good people from a corporate sense who advise around different things and who give leadership into those areas, which is wonderful. But when you've got to do it all yourself, it's a big, big strain and puts pressure.
So how would we speak prophetically into those spaces? Like, we've talked about this season of podcast. We really had this term deeper come to us as we were planning the podcast. How would we speak into those situations around the importance of deepening our relationship with God? What would be our prophetic call into that space?
That's a great question. Chris, got any answers?
Oh, now, Andrew, come on. That's called, I think the counsellors listening would say that's a bit of deflection there, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm good at that. And I am good at that. But I do wonder whether there are some things that pastors are expected to do, but it's just not their gift mix and it's not their skill set, and therefore they shouldn't do it, because I wonder whether it creates this whole idea of maybe I'm doing the things that I'm not supposed to do and I'm not good at, and therefore it takes all my time, and the things that I really want to do and that I'm really good at, that I should do, don't then get the attention, and then it draws me away not only from those things but from God himself, and therefore I become susceptible to doing things that I wouldn't want to
normally do.
Yeah, that I wouldn't normally do, and that can be.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that sense of how do you maintain your identity as a child of God, whilst the role. And I think, if we think about business leaders, like we have a whole range of people who would listen to the podcast, like there's a whole range of pressures that people experience. There are some nuanced ones, I think, around pastoral ministry, but the pressures of life, sort of crushing in,
Yeah.
how do we create the space to draw closer to God? And like I think this whole sense of God is continually drawing us deeper into relationship with him.
Yeah.
So no matter how long, whether you've been a Christian for 2 days or 20 days or 20 years, or 50 years, God is always, always going to be drawing us deeper into relationship with him. There are always layers of the onion that need to be peeled back
Yeah.
to create a deeper relationship with God. Go.
I agree. I agree, and I think in that same vein, the thing that just popped into my head was this whole idea of, there are some practices that we put in place to make sure that we're healthy, make sure that we're following God, like basic things that, foundational things for our walk with God, like, are we reading our Bible? I think sometimes the first thing that goes is our reading of the Bible, our worship, space of pausing in our days, numbers of times to listen to God, because we get so busy because, well, I've got to do that meeting, I've got to manage that staff person, I've got to, I've got to meet with the person about the budget, I've got to meet the person about the small groups because our small groups aren't functioning well. And, you can just go list. And then suddenly I didn't listen to God. I didn't pause, and listen to what God might have been saying to me in that conversation. Oh, I think I overstepped the mark there. Oh, I think I raised my voice in a bad way. I think I came across too, dogmatic. Are we even taking time to self-assess and correct? Because if we take the posture of, I'm right, it's that balance between humility and humanity. Where is that balance taking place? And I think we, in numbers of cases, and you can see it in some of these leaders, they verge too much on the humanity. And maybe whereas sitting back, being accountable to someone, openly, saying stuff, I'm struggling with this. We're not superhuman, so we shouldn't try and be. Jesus was great, but I'm not Jesus.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's all those sorts of things. And so I think that if we could do that and posture ourselves in a way that has some sort of balance between humility and humanity, understanding that is something that we have to hold in tension all the time, I think that would be a good starting point for us.
I love that humility, humanity.
And that's not
So
mine, by
he's,
the way. That just comes from one of my friends here at New
oh,
Community.
come
It's real.
on.
Yeah, it's not mine. I'm not going to. There it is. Like I'll put it out there. It's not mine. It's one of it's our senior pastor here, and so he's got this thing about that, and I think it's really crucial that we hold that tension. But at the same time, I think balancing that humanity and humility enables us to go to God and say, God, my humanity's getting in the way,
So here's my challenge, Andrew. Some of the things that you listed out. Oh, I've got the finger out. Some of the things that you.
I'm in trouble
I'm pointing.
now. If you
I'm
can't
pointing.
see her, she's pointing.
Some of the things that you pointed out can become task lists for us: reading the Bible, worship, quiet times, and I come back to life is busy. Life is often about tasks that we need to tick off.
Yeah.
But God calls us back to relationship. And so one of the things in Sheffield, and I'd thought about whether I would share this today, and I will. I'll just
Good. Go there.
put it out there.
Come on.
Our first task when we gathered as global leaders was to do a listening exercise. And as you would expect in a accessible prophecy gathering,
Yeah.
and the listening exercise was essentially to spend a good chunk of time, I can't remember whether it was half an hour or 45 minutes, basically just wandering, walking or sitting with Jesus and allowing him to draw our attention to treasure. A bit of a treasure hunt. what treasure does he want to reveal to us as we're wandering? And so I went out the back in the garden. I just felt this call to just sit and observe what's around me. And so I sat in this chair and I looked at the garden, and then I just became aware of, I think I might have said, Jesus, what do you want me to see? What treasure do you have for me? And I think I closed my eyes and I imagined Jesus saying to me, I want you to dance with me. And so he held out his hand, and it was a bit of a slow dance. And as we were dancing, I became aware that all of these responsibilities and things that I'd carried, I couldn't carry them. I couldn't hold them when I was dancing with Jesus. Like I wasn't able to do that when, if I really wanted to dance with Jesus, it was almost like I had backpacks on, like our role or work we do, ministry that we're involved with, family responsibilities. It was like Jesus said, you just need to take off your backpacks, you put them down and just dance with me. And it struck me that it's not very often that, like, this was an unusual picture for Jesus to give me. I haven't had a dancing with Jesus picture before.
Yeah.
I'm not a dancer. I don't dance very well. But I sat with it, and it sat with me for a long time. Like, I've been back a few days. It probably was a week and a half ago, nearly 2 weeks ago now that came.
Yeah.
And it struck me that the relationship Jesus wants is proximity, exactly what you were saying at the start, that proximity to us. But sometimes we create it to be a task, and Jesus just wants to dance with us. He just wants to have the closeness. And so as I've come back to that, it's almost become a bit of a meditation for me around approaching Jesus again and engaging in the dance again with him, and becoming aware of, I'm holding the backpacks again, I need to put them down, or what's weighing heavily, what's around me. So it's become a bit of a meditation for me, because I feel like for me to go deeper in the prophetic gifting, for me to go deeper in relationship with God, Jesus is saying to me the starting point is that he just wants to dance with me. He just wants to have the closeness of relationship. It's not about, I'm sure deeper revelation will come. I'm sure there'll be other things that happen. But actually, for me, his first task that he wants, first thing that he wants to do is actually just connect with me in closeness.
Yeah.
He wants me to put down what I'm carrying, to put down the responsibilities, and actually engage with him in the dance.
Yeah.
And I
So
think
good.
if we talk about deeper, I wonder if, like, all of those things we talked about, Bible study, engaging in worship, listening to God, like, they're all really important stuff to do. But there's something more that I feel like we're missing.
Yeah.
Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally, in fact, I'm sitting there picturing people all across the world now as they listen to this podcast, assuming the ballroom dancing position and going, come on, Jesus, you take it. And I'll just hold your hands. Yeah, I'll just hold your hands.
Well, the other thing about the dance is that Jesus leads. Like, like I was dancing, and I could feel God saying, or Jesus saying to me, stop trying to control the dance. Stop trying to lead me. Let me lead you. And I'm like, oh, all right.
And that, see, that in itself, like if you're into ballroom dancing, wherever you are, you know that it takes an act of surrender to allow another person to lead. And
so
that
true.
in itself is massive. And I wonder whether that's, like, if we're saying, actually, we have this picture of, people wanting to help people go deeper with God, then maybe that first act is that act of surrender and say, okay, God, well, I'm facing all this stuff, whether it's, job situations or whether it's, my ministry or whether it's, I just feel like I'm not hearing from you. I am just going to assume the position today. Maybe it's a ballroom dancing position as a symbolic thing, but just to go, you know what, God, the first thing I'm going to do is surrender to you and just say to you again, I allow you to lead. And maybe it just begins there, as simply as that. See what happens. Good word, Chris. It's a really good
thank
word.
you.
Good on you. I love it.
Go Jesus. Well, I think, and maybe that was what struck me. That's what Jesus gave to me. But maybe as we start this season, as people are engaging with us, which we love to hear stories from people as you're listening to stuff. Also would love to hear if there are particular topics you want us to cover. But I wonder if you're engaging with this season 3 of the podcast, maybe spend some time asking Jesus, what's the treasure that he wants to reveal to you today? Use that as a listening exercise to really allow God, because for some of you, it may be dancing. For some of you, it may be something very, very different. But this sense of Jesus has treasure to reveal to us, not necessarily about us. It might be about us, but actually, I suspect it's more likely to be about the relationship that he wants with us, about drawing us deeper into that space with him. But you're right. The first step, I'm pretty sure, is surrender.
Yeah, that's amazing. Reminds me of so Leanne's mum passed away a few years ago now, and she used to call all the grandchildren her treasure. And so as soon as you say that word, it reminds me of her. But it's interesting, and I think the thing that we need to remember is, yes, we are absolutely God's treasure. Like that's where our identity is found at the beginning. When I was senior minister at that large church down the road a few years ago, somebody said, oh, it must be great, you're senior minister, blah, blah, blah. And I go, my identity is not found in this. I could walk away from this in a heartbeat, and ended up walking away from that, and that's fine. But my identity was in being a son of the Most High, a son of God, a child of God. And I knew in those moments of difficulty, I was his treasure. And so, being able to hold that, know that to begin with, and then being able to say, because I know you care for me this much, I am a treasured one of yours, I will surrender to you, whatever that is. That's an amazing first step. I think that's a great first step. Yeah.
And the thing is, Andrew, we feel like God reveals that and we go, oh, isn't that amazing? He wants to reveal more. He wants to reveal more of that to us. So if you've been a Christian for 50 years, God has more for you.
Yeah.
And I don't know, have you been a Christian for Andrew?
Not quite. No. Actually, not by a long shot. I was 16 when I gave my life to Jesus, and I'm not in my 60s. In fact, I'm a little way from it. No, I'm a good way from it. I'm a good way from it. Let's say that.
We're not ageist.
We don't talk about our age, do we, Chris? No,
we don't.
No, we don't.
Hilarious. All right. Well, I think our time's up, Andrew, but we've got some great plans for the next few recordings of our podcast. As always, we would love to hear from you if you have anything that you would like us to chat through, or any suggestions about people who you think would be great on the podcast. But lovely to see you again, Andrew, and take care, and we'll chat soon.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Prophecy Project. We hope you've been encouraged as you've listened today. We would love to connect with you. You can do that by following Accessible Prophecy on Instagram and Facebook. If you have a question or topic you would like us to cover, please check the podcast information description for ways that you can connect with us and for links to resources, workshops, and coaching. We hope you'll join us for the next Prophecy Project podcast.